SPQR. Four letters carved into the bones of an empire. You've seen them on crumbling ruins, ancient coins, even Hollywood's idea of Roman glory. But what if I told you that this symbol, supposedly representing the Roman people, was never really about them at all? It was a mask, a weapon, a carefully crafted illusion used by Rome's elite to justify expansion, silence, rebellion, and crown power with the illusion of democracy. Because behind the grandeur of marble and marching legions, Rome's greatest empire wasn't just built with swords. It was built with symbols, and SPQR was the sharpest of them all. Welcome to Shadows of Ancient History, and today we're peeling back the golden veneer to expose the dark secrets behind Rome's most enduring lie, one woven through the entire history of the Roman Empire. The Roman Republic, so noble in name, so deceptive in design. Officially, SPQR stood for Senatus Populusque Romanus, the Senate and people of Rome. It was meant to signal unity, patrician and plebeian hand in hand, building a world-conquering civilization. But dig a little deeper and the cracks begin to show. The Senate, Rome's so-called deliberative body, was never elected by the people. It was a council of the elite landowners, old money patrician families that passed power down like family heirlooms. And while popular assemblies did exist, their decisions were routinely overridden by senatorial decrees, vetoes, or behind-the-scenes manipulation. In theory, Rome was a republic. In practice, it was a stage where the plebs were the audience, the Senate, the scriptwriters, and populism, the performance. Consider the Lex Hortensia of 287 BCE, a law that granted plebeian decisions the force of law. On the surface, it was revolutionary. Plebs could finally bypass the Senate right, but the aftermath. Many of those plebeian laws were quietly co-written by patricians and brokered by intermediaries loyal to aristocratic houses. It was the illusion of power without its substance. Even the structure of voting told a deeper story. Votes in the Comitia Centuriata, Rome's primary assembly, were weighted. Wealthy citizens in the top centuries voted first and held more collective power. Poorer citizens could technically vote, but by the time their turn came, the outcome was often already decided. This wasn't democracy, it was managed populism, and it was effective. Why use force when you can use form? Why rule by the sword when you can rule by myth? Enter the census, a noble concept organizing citizens by property and service. But in reality, it was a surveillance tool. By knowing what each citizen owned, who they associated with, where they lived, the state could calculate not just taxes, but loyalty. Rebellion could be tracked before it ever had a name. Public works and monuments also played their part. The Cloaca Maxima, one of the world's earliest sewer systems, was celebrated as a gift to the people. Though primarily a marvel of sanitation, it also symbolized the Republic's growing control over nature, over disease, and over the engineered rhythms of city life. Historians still debate whether the Republic's early reforms were genuinely progressive or cleverly disguised strategies to dilute unrest. Was Rome evolving or placating? One strange footnote lies in the cursus honorum, the rigid ladder of a political office. While it appeared to offer any ambitious citizen a path to power, in reality, the costs of campaigning, bribery, and social networking ensured only the rich could climb it. A plebeian might dream of becoming consul, but without a wealthy sponsor or a timely war to win the crowd, it remained just that, a dream. Take Gaius Licinius Stolo. In the 4th century BCE, he proposed laws limiting land ownership by elites. He was celebrated as a hero of the people, but decades later, his own family was found violating the same law. Reformer, perhaps. And what of the people themselves? They rallied, they marched, they fought. The Secessio Plebis, a series of mass walkouts by the plebeians, threatened to collapse the Republic more than once. The people knew their worth, but each time concessions were made, then slowly eroded. Bread was offered, soothing words whispered, and SPQR etched into monuments promised, "We are one." But they weren't. the Senate ruled. The people watched, and the symbol between them, SPQR, was a curtain, a veil, a trick of political light. Rome didn't rule by force alone, it ruled by feeding the senses and the stomach. By the 2nd century BCE, the Republic had become masterful in the art of distraction. Grand forms rose like stone stages. Statues of victorious generals gleamed beneath the Mediterranean sun. But beneath the marble, the strategy was simple. Feed the people, and they will forget. Ponemet Circin says, bread and circuses. It wasn't just a saying, it was policy. The grain dole introduced around 123 BCE by Gaius Gracchus offered subsidized wheat to Roman citizens. On paper, it was a safety net. In reality, it was a leash. Each citizen who received free grain became tethered to the state's generosity. Descent starvation, obedience. And while the bellies were fed, the eyes were dazzled. The Ludi public games began as religious festivals, but soon ballooned into political spectacles. Gladiatorial combats, chariot races, theatrical plays. Candidates for office would sponsor week-long celebrations vying for attention and allegiance. The more blood spilled in the arena, the more cheers in the street. A strange equation, but Rome understood it well. The Colosseum would not be built until the imperial period, but even during the Republic, temporary wooden amphitheaters were erected with astonishing speed. One such structure collapsed in 53 BCE, with ancient sources claiming thousands were killed, though the exact number remains debated. Yet the games continued. After all, loyalty was being bought in applause and awe. One lesser-known tradition occurred during Navalia Proelia mock naval battles staged in flooded arenas. These were engineering marvels, yes, but also psychological warfare. The people watched real men drown in artificial lakes and somehow believed their leaders more divine for orchestrating it all. Meanwhile, laws were passed in plain view, but with hidden motives. The Lex Claudia passed in 218 BCE forbade senators from owning large ships. On the surface, a move against elite profiteering. In practice, it may have shifted influence towards smaller traders, some of whom aligned closely with senatorial interests. And what of Rome's provinces? Populism was carefully exported. Colonies were established not just to expand territory, but to spread the illusion of Roman identity. Retired soldiers were granted land, Roman law imposed, and local leaders were elected from families that mirrored the Roman elite. Citizenship was dangled like bait, and those who accepted it often found themselves bound, not liberated. Historians still debate whether this expansion was ideological or opportunistic. Was Rome civilizing the world or simply outsourcing obedience? One curious case is the town of Tianum Sidicinum in Campania. When local leaders requested Roman-style forums and baths, the Senate obliged, and shortly thereafter, a legion was stationed nearby. Whether coincidence or calculation, the message was clear: Romanization came with military oversight. And yet, to the average Roman citizen, things looked prosperous. New roads brought spices from the east. Gold flowed from Spain. Slaves poured in from every war-torn border. The average plebeian might never vote meaningfully, but he could eat imported figs, watch men fight to the death, and call himself Roman. It was enough for a while, but under the surface, something shifted. Voices began to rise, not from the Senate, but from the streets. Populist politicians known as populares began challenging the old order. They spoke in plain Latin, promised reforms, and most importantly, gave the illusion that power could change hands. The people, weary of distant wars and elitist games, began listening. Men like the Gracchi brothers Tiberius and Gaius stepped onto this stage. They bypassed the Senate, appealed directly to the masses, and proposed radical land redistribution. But populism, when not controlled, becomes dangerous. Tiberius was clubbed to death by senators in 133 BCE. Gaius was hunted down and forced to commit suicide 10 years later. Their bodies were thrown into the Tiber. Their reforms repealed, but the echo remained. bread, circuses, blood. The formula worked until it didn't. And so Rome doubled down. New temples were built. Triumphs paraded through the streets, generals clad in purple robes pretending not to be kings. The Senate funded larger games, more grain, louder distractions. But something had changed. The people had seen the curtain flutter, and behind it, they saw men, not gods. The people were awakening, and the Senate, it responded with its oldest weapon, a smile. Enter the tribunes of the plebs, officials said to be the guardians of the commoners. Armed with the sacred intercessio, they could veto any law that threatened the people's welfare. They were untouchable, sacrosanct. Their office was the republic's shield against tyranny. Or so the story went. In reality, the tribunes were Rome's most carefully cultivated illusion. They were elected by the people, but elections were seldom pure. Votes were corralled into centuries, or tribes often manipulated through patronage networks. Wealthy families sponsored candidates, funded their campaigns, and expected obedience once the laurel wreaths were donned. Take Marcus Livius Drusus. A tribune in 91 BCE, he proposed sweeping reforms, land redistribution, expanded citizenship, judicial restructuring. He framed it all as serving the people. But behind closed doors, Drusus was in deep with the Senate. His proposals, scholars argue, were less about justice and more about cementing elite influence before the real radicals got there first. And yet he was assassinated, stabbed in his own home, because even puppet tribunes once unchained could go too far. Historians still debate whether Drusus was a reformer betrayed or a wolf in tribune's clothing. Either way, his death sparked the social war, a bloody conflict with Rome's Italian allies who had grown tired of false promises and second-class status. That's the danger of symbolic populism. When symbols crack, revolutions seep through the gaps. Some tribunes did attempt genuine reform. Saturninus in 100 BCE pushed for land of veterans and grain subsidies. He mobilized the mob, bypassed the Senate, and aligned with powerful generals like Gaius Marius. It ended predictably. The Senate declared him an enemy of the state. He fled to the Capitoline Hill, only to be stoned to death by a hired crowd, his body left to rot. Not all enemies of the Senate wore armor. Some wore togas. But there were stranger stories, two tales that rarely make the textbooks. One tribune, Publius Clodius Pulcher, was once an aristocrat, but he renounced his patrician status to become a plebeian just so he could hold the tribunate. It was a legal loophole, a political farce, and a masterstroke. Clodius used the office to rewrite laws, exile rivals, and empower street gangs loyal to him. The streets of Rome became war zones, populism not as policy, but as weaponized chaos. And yet, the people loved him. He hosted games, distributed grain, and insulted the Senate in public speeches. He was magnetic, vulgar, theatrical. He gave voice to the voiceless and a dagger to those who crossed him. His end came as brutally as his rise. In 52 BCE, Clodius was ambushed on the Appian Way by the rival gang of Titus Annius Milo. His body was burned in a public funeral that became a riot. The Senate House itself was set ablaze in the chaos, a symbol reduced to ashes. And through it all, SPQR stood unchanged, emblazoned on shields carved into stone, whispered in rituals. The symbol endured even as its meaning rotted. That's the genius of Rome's propaganda machine. You can kill a tribune, you can silence a crowd, but a symbol, it lives on. Still, the cracks widen. By the late Republic, populism had become a dirty word in elite circles, but in the streets, it was the only language the people understood. They no longer trusted the Senate, the consuls, or the courts. They trusted the voice that spoke loudest and promised most. It wasn't just about bread anymore. It was about power. And one man, clever, charismatic, ruthless, was about to ride that wave to the very edge of monarchy. His name, Gaius Julius Caesar. Julius Caesar did not invent populism, he perfected it. By the time Caesar entered the political arena, Rome was fractured. The Senate had become a fortress of fear, gripped by the memory of riots, assassinations, and civil unrest. The people, on the other hand, were hungrier than ever for food, for justice, for a leader who would listen. Caesar listened. He spoke not from marble podiums, but from crowded strongs. He mingled with veterans, joked with plebs, wept at funerals. He staged lavish games, paid debts, and redistributed land. But beneath every act of generosity lay a calculation. Caesar was a patrician by birth, but he wore the mask of the popularis, the man of the people. It wasn't a contradiction. It was a strategy. One of his earliest moves came during his term as aedile in 65 BCE. He bankrupted himself deliberately to throw extravagant games and festivals. The debts were immense, but the returns political loyalty, name recognition, and the whispered myth that he was different. He also revived the image of Marius, his uncle, by marriage, long considered a dangerous populist. By aligning with Marius's legacy, Caesar signaled his allegiance to the people and his defiance of the Senate. Then came the conquest of Gaul. From 58 to 50 BCE, Caesar transformed himself from ambitious politician to living legend. His commentaries. Ghost-written propaganda disguised as military reports circulated like wildfire. Each victory was a message. This is what I do for Rome. But many scholars now ask, was Gaul about glory or leverage? With a loyal army and endless spoils, Caesar returned to Rome not as a servant of the Republic, but as its shadow. When the Senate demanded he disband his forces before crossing the Rubicon, he faced a choice: submit or seize. He chose the latter. Let the die be cast, he is said to have declared, though some believe the phrase was invented later to mythologize the moment. Regardless, the Rubicon was crossed, the Republic unraveled. Still, Caesar maintained appearances. He declined royal titles. He refused a crown publicly. He emphasized his role as dictator for the people, a temporary savior restoring order. But he extended his dictatorship repeatedly. And in 44 BCE, he accepted the title Dictator Perpetuo Dictator for life. Historians still debate whether Caesar genuinely wanted to reform Rome or simply rule it. His policies were undeniably progressive: land for veterans, debt relief, calendar reform. But each move further consolidated his power, weakened the Senate, and deepened the illusion that one man could represent an entire republic. And then the Ides of March. On March 15, 44 BCE, Caesar was stabbed 23 times by a group of senators calling themselves the Liberators. Among them, Brutus, once treated like a son by Caesar. They believed they were saving the Republic. They weren't. The assassination did not restore democracy. It shattered the last fragile illusions holding the Republic together. Riots followed. Civil war erupted. Caesar's adopted heir Octavian took the stage, and history changed course. But there's a strange footnote in this tale. After Caesar's death, a new star appeared in the sky. At least that's what Rome believed. During the Ludi Victoriae, Caesar's games held in his honor, a comet blazed across the heavens. The people said it was Caesar's soul ascending to the gods. Octavian seized the moment. He declared Caesar a deity, Divus Julius, and himself the son of a god. Populism hadn't died. It had evolved into apotheosis, another transformation that would echo throughout the entire history of the Roman Empire. And as the Republic bled in the shadows, a new kind of ruler emerged, one who would master the art of appearing democratic while ruling absolutely. His name was Augustus. And he would make sure that SPQR remained etched into every temple banner and heart, long after the people had lost their voice. The Republic was dead, but no one dared say it aloud. When Octavian emerged victorious from the ashes of Caesar's murder and the civil wars that followed, he did not proclaim himself king. That word rex still stung too deeply from Rome's ancient past. Instead, he offered something far more seductive: stability. In 27 BCE, Octavian performed a masterstroke. He appeared before the Senate and offered to relinquish all his powers. In return, the Senate, conveniently filled with his loyalists, begged him to stay. He accepted with humility, adopting the name Augustus, meaning the revered one. And so began the Roman Empire, not with thunder, not with revolution, but with a carefully staged performance. Augustus claimed he had restored the Republic. Officially, all institutions remained the Senate, the assemblies, the magistracies. SPQR still adorned every military standard, every coin, every triumphal arch. But in practice, nothing remained the same. Augustus controlled the military, the treasury, foreign policy, and religious authority. He was princeps, first among equals. But there were no equals. It was populism perfected into monarchy. And the people, they cheered. After years of bloodshed, famine, and chaos, Augustus brought peace, the Pax Romana. Roads expanded, cities flourished, temples rose in gleaming marble. The masses received grain games and grand speeches. The elites, pacified by wealth and honors, played along. Historians still debate whether Augustus was a genius reformer or a benevolent tyrant. But one thing is certain: he understood optics better than anyone before him. He minted coins bearing the image of a humble citizen himself. He commissioned poets like Virgil to sing of Rome's divine destiny. He built the Arapacis, an altar to peace that also just happened to feature his family in divine procession. Even strange omens were woven into his myth. When lightning struck, the temple of Tyranny was said to be a sign from the gods, blessing his rule. Augustus didn't just wear power, he became it with divine approval. And yet he never abolished the Senate. Why would he? He didn't need to. The Senate passed laws that Augustus wrote. They debated policies that Augustus dictated. They offered honors that Augustus subtly demanded. Their existence was a mirage, one the people believed in because they wanted to. It was governance by theater, and SPQR became the stage curtain. Across the empire, the phrase Senatus Populusque Romanus was etched onto bridges, boundary stones, and official edicts. Even in distant provinces like Britannia or Judea, locals were told they lived under the will of the Senate and the people. But they didn't. They lived under emperors. Still, the illusion mattered. People obey more willingly when they believe they chose the ruler themselves. Augustus knew this. So did his successors. Even as Rome decayed from Tiberius's paranoia to Nero's excess, the phrase remained unchanged. SPQR outlived emperors. It outlived civil wars. It outlived truth threaded through the entire history of the Roman Empire. It has both shield and sword. Because symbols once ingrained no longer need substance. They become sacred. And so Rome endured its people believing they still held power, its Senate pretending it still ruled, its emperors cloaked in modesty while holding the world in their palms. The Republic became empire. The citizen became spectator. And populism, once a cry for justice, became a lullaby for obedience. The wind no longer rustles the banners of the Senate. The voices of plebeians have long faded from the stone steps of the Forum. Yet SPQR still whispers. You'll see it on manhole covers in modern Rome, on city crests, on marble walls scrubbed clean by centuries of rain. The symbol endured not because it represented truth, but because it mastered illusion. What began as a promise, the Senate and people of Rome, became a performance. And over time, the performance replaced the people. Symbols do that. They survive beyond the systems they once described. They become the system. Populism in Rome was not a mistake. It was a tool. a mask that the powerful wore to appear human, a language borrowed by kings to sound like citizens. And when the people cried out, Rome gave them bread and borrowed their voice. We like to believe we are far from marble columns and Latin slogans. But look closer. When slogans drown out policy, when spectacle replaces substance, when power cloaks itself in the language of the people, you are not far from SPQR. You are walking among its echoes. Because the story of Rome was never just ancient history, it was a lesson, and sometimes a warning. The banners may change, the language may shift, but the stage is eternal. And if you listen closely beneath the roar of crowds and the shimmer of gold leaf, you might still hear it. 4 letters, carved not just into stone, but into memory, SPQR.